Professor Branestawm rang the bell for his housekeeper, and then, remembering that he'd taken the bell away to invent a new kind of one, he went out into the kitchen to find her. "Mrs. Flittersnoop," he said, looking at her through his near-sighted glasses and holding the other 4 pairs, 2 in each hand, "put your things on and come to the pictures with me. There's a very instructive film on this evening, all about the home life of the Brussels sprout." "Thank you kindly, sir," said Mrs. Flittersnoop. "I've just got my ironing to finish, which won't take a minute, and I'll be ready." So while the professor was putting on his boots and taking them off again because he'd got them on the wrong feet, and getting some money out of his money box with a bit of wire, she finished off the ironing, put on her best bonnet, the blue one with the imitation strawberries on it, and off they went. "Dear, dear," said the professor when they got back from the pictures. "I don't remember leaving that window open, but I'm glad we did because I forgot my latchkey." "Goodness gracious, oh mussy me, oh dearie, dearie," cried Mrs. Flittersnoop. The room was all anyhow, the things were all nohow, and it was a sight enough to make a tidy housekeeper like Mrs. Flittersnoop give notice at once. But she didn't do it. "The other rooms are the same," called the professor from the top of the stairs. "Burglars have been." And so they had. While the professor and his housekeeper had been at the pictures, thieves had broken in. They'd stolen the professor's silver teapot that his auntie gave him, and the butter dish he was going to give his auntie, only he forgot. They'd taken the housekeeper's picture postcard album with the views of Brighton in it, and the professor's best egg cups that were never used except on Sundays. "This is all wrong," said the professor, coming downstairs and running in and out of the rooms and keeping on finding more things that had gone. I won't have it. I'm going to invent a burglar catcher. That's what I'm going to invent." "We'd better get a policeman first," said Mrs. Flittersnoop. So he fetched a policeman and then went into his inventory to invent his burglar catcher, and Mrs. Flittersnoop went to bed. The burglars hadn't taken any of the professor's inventing tools because the door was fastened with a special professor lock that didn't open with a key at all, but only when you squeezed some toothpaste into it and then blew through the keyhole. And of course the burglars didn't know about that. They never do know about things of that sort. Then he went on inventing day and night for ever so long. "Come and see the burglar catcher," he said one day, and they both went into his study where a funny-looking sort of thing was all fixed up by the window. "Bless me," said Mrs. Flittersnoop. "It looks like a mangle with a lot of arms." "Yes," said the professor. "It had to look like that because it was too difficult making it look like anything else. Now, watch." He brought out a bolster with his overcoat fastened round it, and they went round outside the window. "Now, this is a dummy burglar," he explained, putting the bolster thing on the windowsill. "Now, in he goes." He opened the window and pushed the dummy inside. Immediately there were a lot of clicking and whirring noises, and the mangled-looking thing twiddled its arms. The wheels began to go round and round, and things began to squeak and whiz. And the window closed itself behind the dummy. Bang! "It's working," cried the professor, dancing with joy and treading on 3 geraniums in the flower bed. Suddenly, the clicking and the whizzing stopped. A trap door opened in the study floor, and something fell through it. And then a bell rang. "That's the alarm," said the professor, rushing away. "It means the burglar thing's caught a burglar." He led the way down into the cellar, and there on the cellar floor was the bolster with the overcoat on. And it was all tied up with ropes and wound round with straps and tape so that it looked like one of those mummy things out of a museum. You could hardly see any bolster or coat at all, it was so tied up. "Well, I never," said Mrs. Flittersnoop. The professor undid the bolster and put his overcoat on, Then he went upstairs and wound the burglar catcher up again, put on the housekeeper's bonnet by mistake, and went to the pictures again. Well, he wanted to see the Brussels sprout film once more, because he'd missed bits of it before through Mrs. Flittersnoop keeping on talking to him about her sister Aggie and how she could never wash up a teacup without breaking the handle off. Mrs. Flittersnoop had finished all her housework and done some mending and got the Professor's supper by the time the pictures were over. But the Professor didn't come in. Quite a long time afterwards, he didn't come in. She wondered where he could have got to. "Forgotten where he lives, I'll be bound," she said. "I never did see such a forgetful man. I'd better get a policeman to look for him." But just as she was going to do that, went the Professor's burglar catcher. "There now!" cried Mrs. Flittersnoop. "A burglar and all! And just when the Professor isn't here to see his machine thing catch him. Oh, tut, 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 tut." She picked up the rolling pin and ran down into the cellar. Yes, it was a burglar, all right. There he lay on the cellar floor, all tied up with rope and wound round with straps and tapes and things, till he looked like a mummy out of a museum. And like the bolster dummy, he was so tied up you could hardly see any of him. "Ah!" cried the housekeeper. "I'll teach you to burgle, that I will." But she didn't teach him that at all. She hit him on the head with a rolling pin, just to make quite sure he shouldn't get away. Then she ran out and got the policeman she was going to fetch to look for the Professor. And the policeman took the burglar away in a wheelbarrow to the police station, all tied up and hit on the head as he was. And the burglar went very quietly. He couldn't do anything else. But the Professor didn't come home. Not all night he didn't come home. But the policeman had caught the other burglars by now and got all the Professor's and the housekeeper's things back, except the postcards of Brighton, which the burglars had sent to their friends. So they'd nothing to do but look for the Professor. But they didn't find him. They hunted everywhere. They looked under the seat of the pictures, but all they found was Mrs. Flittersnoop's bonnet with the imitation strawberries on it, which they took to the police station as evidence, if you know what that is. Anyway, they took it whether you know or not. "Oh, where can he be?" said the housekeeper. "Oh, he's a careless man to go losing himself like that." Then, when they'd hunted a lot more and still hadn't found the Professor, the judge said it was time to try the new burglar they'd caught. So they put him in the prisoner's place in the court, and the court usher called out, "Ush!" and everybody ushed.
You are charged with being a burglar inside Professor Branestawm's house," said the judge. "Now, what do you mean by it?"
But the prisoner couldn't speak. He was too tied up and wound round to do more than wriggle.
"Ah," said the judge, "nothing to say for yourself, and I should think not, too."
Then the policeman undid the ropes and unwound the straps and tapes and things, and there were such a lot of them that they filled the court up, and everyone was struggling about in a long, snaky sort of tape and rope, and it was ever so long before they could get all sorted out again. "Goodness gracious me!" cried Mrs. Flittersnoop. "If it isn't the Professor!" It was the Professor. There he was in the prisoner's place. It was he all the time. Only nobody knew it because he was so wound up and hidden.
"Now, what is all this?"
said the judge.
Please, I'm Professor Branestawm,"
said the Professor, taking off all his 5 pairs of glasses, which fortunately hadn't been broken, and bowing to the court.
"Well,"
snapped the judge. He was very cross because the mixed-up tangle of tapes and things had pulled his wig crooked and he felt silly.
"what has that got to do with anything? Didn't you break into the Professor's house?"
I left my key at home and got in through the window," said the Professor, "forgetting about the burglar catcher."
That is neither here nor there, said the judge. Nor anywhere at all, for that matter, and it wouldn't make any difference if it was. You broke into the professor's house. Now, you can't deny it.
No, said the professor, but it was my own house.
All the more reason why you shouldn't break into it, said the judge. I mean, what's the front door for?
Well, I forgot the key, said the professor.
Don't argue, said the judge.
And he held up Mrs. Flittersnoop's bonnet that the professor had worn by mistake and left under the seat of the pictures.
Now, this bonnet, I understand, belongs to your housekeeper.
Mrs. Flittersnoop got up and bowed. Indeed it does, your majesty, she said, thinking that was the right way to speak to a judge. But the professor's welcome to it, I'm sure, if he wants it.
There you are, said the judge. She says he's welcome to it if he wants it. Now that means she didn't give it to him, did you?
No, said Mrs. Flittersnoop. I thought...
What you thought isn't evidence,
snapped the judge. Well, what is evidence then? Said Mrs. Flittersnoop, beginning to get cross. I never heard of the stuff, and I'm tired of all this talk that I don't understand. Give me my best bonnet and let me go. I've got the dinner to get.
Oh, give the woman her bonnet, said the judge.
And then he turned to the professor.
If it had been anybody else's house you'd broken into, he said, we'd have put you in prison.
Of course, said the professor, trying on all his pairs of spectacles, one after the other, to see which the judge looked best through.
And if it had been anyone else who'd broken into your house, we'd have put him in prison,
said the judge. Of course, said the professor, deciding that the judge looked best through his blue sunglasses, because he couldn't see his face so well.
But,
thundered the judge, getting all worked up,
as it was you who broke into the house, and as it was your own house you broke into, we can only sentence you to be set free. And a fine waste of good time this trial has been.
At this, everyone in the court cheered, for they most of them knew the professor and liked him, and were glad everything was going to be all right. And the 12 jurymen cheered louder than anyone, although the judge hadn't taken the least bit of notice of them, and hadn't even asked them their verdict, which was very dislegal of him, if you see what I mean. And as for Mrs. Flittersnoop, she clapped her bonnet on the professor's head, and then several people carried him shoulder high out of the court and home, with the imitation strawberries in Mrs. Flittersnoop's hat rattling away, and the professor bowing and smiling, and looking through first one pair of glasses, and then another.